Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us for this Not in My Church series that we are starting this evening. We particularly want to acknowledge the people who are online from Toowoomba and Sunshine Coast, New South Wales, as well as a number of other places around Brisbane where I am situated and where the rest of our team and two of our presenters are, and one of them is from Melbourne. Thank you for being with us as we explore practical steps for churches to take in being part of the solution instead of wringing our hands and wondering what we might be able to do in this domestic and family violence prevention arena. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we gather. And this is this is the acknowledgement from Queensland Churches Together, who is under which umbrella we are operating this evening. So Queensland Churches Together acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connection to lands, waters, and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and to elders past and present. And so you're probably wondering, or perhaps you know who we are, but just to remind people that we, Queensland Churches Together, are a number of churches in the Brisbane, Queensland area who have been working together for many years. And in this particular commission, of which I'm the chair, my name is Carole Danby, and I am the current chair of the Commission for Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence, which goes back to its inauguration back in 1988. So it's a long-standing work of Queensland Churches Together. And this evening, I would like to start with prayer. And I invite you to join with me in however you would like to acknowledge our God. God of compassion, in the shadowed corners of our homes where pain and fear often dwell, we turn our hearts to you, seeking guidance and strength. Grant us the courage to stand as beacons of light, to confront the darkness of domestic violence with love and resolve. Guide us in our role as instruments of your peace. For in the face of domestic violence, we are called to be agents of change, to nurture safe havens where love and respect reign supreme. In your name, we humbly ask for the courage to make a difference. Amen.
Amen.
And a story from Scripture, from the Gospel of Luke. A lawyer stood up to test Jesus, saying, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "What do you read in the Scriptures? What do you see there?" And the lawyer said, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And you must love your neighbor as you love yourself." Jesus said, "You've answered rightly. Go and do this and you shall live." But the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, said, "But who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied with this story. There was once a man who was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, who fell into the hands of robbers who beat him and left him lying there half dead. Now down that road there came a priest, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite came down that road, and when he saw the man, he too passed by on the other side. Now, down that same road, there came a Samaritan. And when he saw the man, he was moved with compassion. And he went to him and he bandaged his wounds and poured oil and wine on them and put him on his animal and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, he took out some silver coins to pay the innkeeper, saying, "Look after him, and if I owe you anything, I will pay you on my return." Jesus said to the lawyer, "Who was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the lawyer said, "The one who helped him." And Jesus said, "Go and do the same." The word of the Lord for the people of God. So member churches of Queensland Churches Together, our people on our commission represent churches from the Lutheran, the Anglican, the Uniting, Quakers, Churches of Christ, Catholic, and I think that's our present committee at the moment. So we are a great team and work together. So we thank you. And we have two presenters for you this evening, and I'd like to introduce them both to you, but our first one will be Janette, who is joining us from Melbourne. And thank you, Janette, who has been a past chair of this commission and is still a wonderful part of our network. Thank you. Janette is a psychologist and teacher and has been an active member of the Churches of Christ for many years. Her psychology practice focuses on mental health, education, and spiritual faith issues, as well as supporting people caught up in domestic and family violence. Janette has been actively involved in promoting women's issues and educational support throughout Queensland and Victoria through her board memberships, Arethusa College and University of Divinity, and her speaking and writing engagements. In 2015 to 2019, Janette Phelan was the QCT Church representative on the Premiers of Queensland Domestic and Family Violence Implementation Council. She chaired the Joint Churches, this commission, and was a member of the Churches of Christ Domestic Violence Task Force and the Churches of Christ Queensland Healing and Redress Committee. Janette, with all her expertise, is going to share with us, just in case we're not all on the same page, just what is domestic and family violence and some of the update information. Over to you, Janette. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole. Do you want to introduce Jenny?
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'll also mention Jenny so that we can flow on without interruption from me. Jenny is our second presenter and has had an extensive career in human services and in government housing, in NGOs and faith-based organisations, where she's undertaken a wide range of senior roles. She's recently completed a role as project manager for the implementation of the 10 commitments for prevention and responding to domestic and family violence in the Anglican tradition in southern Queensland. She's currently a community member of the Queensland Parole Board, and Jenny has been a board member of the Australasian Institute of Housing, Queensland Shelter, and the Lady Musgrave Trust. She's also the deputy chair of this commission. So thank you as Jenny speaks a little later, and now I'll ask Janette to hold the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole. Appreciate that introduction. Most people today have heard of domestic violence, domestic and family violence, but trying to get a handle on what it is difficult because it represents such a broad range of behaviours. And we've got one definition up there on the slides, which is fairly widely encompassing. It can occur within any family or informal carer relationship at any time and regardless of personal, cultural, economic standing, any part of the community. And it's not always easy to recognise. On the right there, you'll see a copy of the front cover of our book, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which is available through QCT, $5 a copy and represents excellent value. Just to give you a little bit more of a flavour, I'm going to give you some examples of the sorts of things that you might see in a typical domestic and family violence situation. In a moment, the slide's going to come up, giving you some ideas of the, oh, we're having troubles with the slide there. Some ideas of the sorts of things that you might see that can be forms of family violence. Just a couple of points. Threatening a pet is something that you don't necessarily think of as an abusive act, but it can be quite powerful because often a pet is a victim's only solace, the only thing that loves them unconditionally, and sometimes the only thing that's keeping them going. Pets also tie a victim to the family home because it can be difficult for a person to leave and find shelter. That's changing, but certainly it is a concern. The comments there about isolation. Isolation can prevent a victim accessing help. Also, gaslighting does this. Making the person appear crazy either to themselves or others is actually a form of isolation. Threats of suicide by a perpetrator can actually persuade the victim to stay and not to leave, give them the guilt and make them feel like it's their fault. If I die, it's your fault. And another common form of abuse, which is not so often talked about, is elder abuse, which can present itself as neglect, physical abuse, or financial abuse. Just some example, it's easy to think, well, it doesn't happen in my church, but the statistics show otherwise. This is the result of research from Coventry University in the UK, and their research now informs education and reform within British churches. More recent years, we've had some definitive studies done here, and the Anglican and Lutheran churches, church life surveys, and research done in several other denominations show a similar pattern to this. And in fact, there is some evidence that rates of family violence in churches may be a little higher than outside churches. Perpetrators within churches can misuse New Testament passages as a way of manipulating and gaining control over a victim. But that actually leads to further spiritual abuse. Now, a couple of particular types of abuse that I'd like to talk about. Physical abuse, and a specific type of physical abuse called non-lethal strangulation. And you can see the diagram there, which is reproduced in our book, giving you an idea. The signs sometimes are subtle, but non-lethal strangulation can cause acquired brain injury, which can impact on how believable a person is. People tend to minimise what they say if they appear to be brain injured or intellectually incapacitated. Evidence, though, suggests that a person who survives non-fatal strangulation is at least 7 times more likely to be seriously injured or murdered by the perpetrator. Legislation is around in some states now around non-lethal strangulation. It was an early change that we made in Queensland in the Premier's Council, and now it's also legislated against in New South Wales and more recently in Victoria. And the last area I want to talk about is something which you might have seen about in the media in more recent times called coercive control. Coercive control, a victim can feel like a puppet on a string. It refers to ongoing systematic behaviours rather than a single violent episode. It disempowers the victim. It reshapes their view of the world so that they feel like they're totally under control. The thing is that in isolation, the behaviours might appear harmless or trivial, but they build a pattern over time. And a victim of coercive control will gradually lose the capacity to act according to her own free will and leave her trapped in a cycle of abuse. She begins to believe that she's not capable of surviving on her own outside the relationship. Techniques commonly used are isolation, hurtful put-downs, gaslighting, financial control, and surveillance, either physical or through technology, stripping their victim of liberty, eroding their sense of self, and changing their view of normal couple behaviour. Interestingly, the Queensland's Domestic and Family Violence Death Review Advisory Board has noted the presence of coercive control in most domestic and family violence murders. And then a more recent review of family violence deaths in New South Wales found coercive and controlling behaviours were present in 111 out of 112 cases. So it is a real indicator of problems. Last year, though, the Queensland Government introduced new legislation which makes coercive control a standalone offence and can attract a maximum of 14 years imprisonment. It's also illegal in Tasmania and New South Wales. Other states are at various stages of moving towards legislation, but every state is looking at it in some sense. So just a little snapshot, some things you may or may not have known, but gives us a chance to be all on the same page. I'm going to pass back to Carole now and Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you, Janette. One of the questions in the chat was, would those slides be available? And was that slide about the church statistics 1 in 4 and the 42% slide? Did that relate to churches? So just something for you to consider. We might be able to get that at the end.
Yes, I'll have a look at that. That's been, I've got permission from Coventry University to use it. I'll have to look whether that permission flows on to being passed out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Please use the chat. I did forget to say that at the beginning. If you have questions or comments, and we would like to have feedback from you if you feel the need, and we want to hear from you. So now, Jenny, here's the lovely Jenny. I did introduce you earlier, Jenny, with all your experience in housing and parole boards and things, and as the Deputy Chair of this commission. Let's see what churches can do after hearing all of that depressing statistics.
Thanks a lot, Carole. We're just sort of starting with a sort of broader view and coming down to some fairly specific things. The role of faith communities generally in all religious denominations is today frighteningly small in this arena, and it's something overall that perhaps we could all reflect on, how we might collectively through our churches say churches have a strong role here. We're driven in a Christian church's case by the gospel of love that doesn't find room anywhere for abuse of people. We should be the authoritative voice on spiritual abuse. Abusers find and use the tools available to them, and we know that in our context, spiritual abuse is something unique to faith organisations. We have a broad church community when we add up church agencies and aged care and schools and a myriad of things beyond the parish environments that we can use to promote prevention, promote respectful relationships. And I know schools do a lot of terrific things in this area at the moment. Many of our churches have quite strong and distinct links to people who've recently arrived in Australia. And in many cases, those folk look to the church as a first point of contact for all sorts of information about settling in Australia. We should and all want to be. I want our churches to be safe places where people won't be subject to abuse in any form, where people will be listened to, We have a capacity to build our links to services. And at a broader level, we've got this untapped thing about our potential collectively to impact on policy. It is rather disheartening, though, to see the second national plan, 10-year plan for the prevention of violence against women. If you do a bit of a word search on any word associated with church or faith or a religion, you find very little hits in that plan. And that's something collectively we could all reflect upon, how we can up our presence in this area. So that's the wider picture. But coming down to the more specific picture, our first bit of suggestion is around just the importance of maintaining education, maintaining knowledge in this area. It is a bit of a moving feast, particularly in Queensland, with such a large raft of legislative changes over the last couple of years. It's an area where it's always good, like most of the areas we deal in, always good to go back to first principles, think about this issue and how it's played out today. If we think about the emergence of abuse facilitated by technology, that's a whole new area than what our predecessors had when they first got involved in this area through Queensland Churches Together in 1987, did you say, Carole?
88, I think it was. Yes.
88, and these areas will emerge, and it's important to be on top of them.
I'm just going to check in the Purple Book, Jenny. I'm pretty sure I read it was 1988. I'm pretty sure.
In addition to the training that Queensland Churches Together runs, and Carole will talk a little bit more about that later on, there's also an excellent course that is available free through Ridley Theological College in Melbourne. It's self-paced. It goes over, I think, about 6 sessions and has received really positive feedback from people, particularly people that are involved in any sort of teaching role in their church, whether they be clergy or lay leaders, parish council members, and so on. It really goes to the heart of this issue within churches. DV Connect has been funded under the National Plan for Training now for years and years. They've got an excellent 2-hour online interactive training session that can ensure that no matter where you are, you can get good access to that. Highly recommended. So that's 3. But look, there's lots of other things that are available and come and go in this area. So do put that one first. The second initiative that we like to talk a lot about is really trying to do something within these 2 periods of the year where there's a real community focus on domestic violence. That's not to say that other areas of the year aren't important, but you have opportunities here either to join up with another organisation or something happening locally, or to do something discreetly yourself. And those 2 periods are Domestic Violence Prevention Month, which is in May in Queensland, and the 16 Days of Activism, which are coming up at the end of next month, and start on the 25th, I think, of November, which is International Day for Prevention of Violence Against Women, runs through to the 10th of December, which is International Human Rights Day. And within those 2 periods, yes, there's lots of things happening. Get on the Queensland Government website, often lists many of those, but similarly, locally, groups like Zonta do a walk in a number of locations each year, and many of the churches have activities that focus on that area. So keep those 2 periods in mind as opportunities to do something that particularly that links into other things happening locally. The next suggestion is to make sure that you've got quality publications on hand. We do like to promote our own quality publication, but there are lots of other good sources of information. The poster at the back there is from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. And the power and control wheels, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with those, but 3 have been produced by the Alison Baden Clay Foundation, and they were released last year. And they're really good power and control wheels because they've got examples when things are going wrong on one side, and you flip over and you get the description of how things can be better and should be better, which is really helpful when you're talking to people. So there's 3 wheels there. The orange one is the general one. The purple one is for engaging with young people who are vulnerable to getting into abusive relationship. And the third one is around technology. So a new area of abuse for us to all learn about, but also to learn how abuse can be pretty sneaky and can sneak in. One of the areas that is getting quite a lot of discussion is the use of monitoring devices and perhaps a partner installing a monitoring device on a car or on some item that the partner carries with them. And monitoring devices, of course, have all sorts of very positive benefits in our society, but you can see how they can also be a force for very difficult times and tracking and monitoring in a way that's quite unhealthy. The next one is around a red bench, and red benches I discovered were particularly popular in the Anglican tradition in southern Queensland. This is a group of people at St Paul's Ashgrove a few weeks ago who were commissioning, blessing their new red bench, which has lots of symbolism for that community, and is positioned. The church is on a quite prominent corner, so it's got a quite prominent position in a quite prominent corner. Red benches are an initiative of the Red Rose Foundation, and there's something that is really a tangible thing that a parish can do if that's an interest, a very tangible outcome, and it's really what grows from that, the conversations and the connections that grow out of that. We have been talking in this group that perhaps running one of these 1-hour sessions just about installing a red bench might be something that other people have an interest in.
Funny you should say that, Jenny. I've got a red bench in the local park where I am at Carindale. And I think it's installed by the Lions Club.
Right. Yeah, so there's a few. And Brisbane Council have been active in the area too.
Right.
So yeah. It's a very Queensland thing, red benches.
Yes, I think they're called purple benches in Victoria. They didn't know what we were
sort of have
about.
A broader inclusive thing, whereas yeah.
At our church we have a red bench alongside between the church and the roads, and a lot of people use it at a different time. Every time I pass by, so people sitting there and they just
And where is that? Sorry, I missed you saying that.
St John's Anglican Harvey Bay.
Harvey Bay, right?
Lovely.
Yes,
Great.
and quite an active network up in Harvey Bay too, isn't it? Welcome. Okay, I'll keep going because we will fail at the first post by not completing this by the end within an hour. The next one is get to know good local services, and there's some very good phone statewide services in Queensland. These are just 2 directories that can help you do that. Ask Izzy is a purely online service search, extensively used in Queensland. And I have a bit of a vested interest with the Lady Musgrave Trust that I was on for quite a few years, and our little star production each year is the Handy Guide, which goes through a whole lot of women's support services in Queensland. It recently, in the last year or so, went online, but it's still produced in hard copy, and it's a really valuable hard copy tool to have available, and it's free. So so you can order that through the Lady Musgrave Trust website. So if I could just go back to that, just one other point I wanted to make on the referrals is it's an area where it is very important not to go beyond what you feel capable of doing and what you've got some skill and in. And that doesn't mean don't support people. It just means be cautious about not slipping into counselling and therapy, and particularly don't go near referrals to relationship counselling when you know there or you suspect there is abuse within this relationship. So those connections and making good referrals, very important. Sorry, Jackie. The next one was, and again, this is happening in lots and lots of churches where they've got connections with local services, and they have, whether it's fundraising or production of care packages and things like that, is really just dependent on the sort of partnership and connection that a service wants and that a parish has capacity to deliver. But there's lots of examples of that happening through the service system. So there are a few ideas. I'll hand over to Carole for our last idea, which is something that QCT developed late last year. So I'll hand over to you, Carole.
Thank you, Jenny. One of the things that churches could do as well is use their notice boards to actually put up just brief comments or something, no excuse for abuse, or there are a number of simple and quips that can be used, especially in those months that you referred to, the month of May, for awareness of domestic and family violence and the 16 days of activism. But to get started in my own parish at Carina, we really needed to sort of have a questionnaire. So that's what this assessment tool is. And it's available on the Queensland Churches Together website under our resources. And it's just very simple to download. But it gives you a starting point with some questions that might start to level one is, how is your community aware? Is there awareness in your community? How might you raise awareness? And it gives a couple of ideas, as Jenny's mentioned, having good literature available for people to pick up and take with them after church services in a place that is prominent. A poster, perhaps on the church door, or perhaps on the back of toilets in that kind of area, that can give contact information for people. A DFV material is included in an induction for staff members and volunteers. Do they understand how they might need to, how they might recognise abuse and so on? So there are a couple of things in the level one that parishes might like to think about and have a little assessment group that goes around and says, well, how are we going on this? What's our performance? Well, we've never even done this before, so we're really back at 1. But if we're already up to 6 or 7 or 1 to 10, what could we do extra? What could we do now, and what could we do later? And who is going to take responsibility? I think that's a really good, helpful thing to do. It might be great to have great ideas, but in the end, it often is left to a couple of people. And we don't want to take on too much, but let's do something. The second level on the assessment tool then is, well, okay, we're aware and we've been doing things like this for a long time. Well, how do we engage? So how do we demonstrate our commitment to tackling domestic abuse within our church? Do we, for example, have sermons or particular prayer groups or some focus areas where we could actually invite people to come along? In my own parish, I had a 3-minute video after a church service on a Sunday morning, and I wasn't sure people would stay, and just about everybody did. And one woman just thanked me afterwards very quietly, and I thought showing a video of the church speaking out against abuse and calling it sinful, this woman felt supported in a way that I don't even know who she is. I've never seen her before, but she was she came and thanked me for doing very little, in fact. What local service systems are available, Jenny's already mentioned that, so that you can refer people on. The Ridley College course that we all undertook here at the Commission was really helpful in making sure we didn't overstep our abilities and that we knew how to refer on, how to support people as well. Does the staff have regular training? Does the parish offer something, or the church offer something extra? Like this, for example, tuning into what we have to offer at Queensland Churches Together, we can do the work and maybe your staff can just come along. So that's level 2 engagement. And then level 3 is support, demonstrating a commitment and competence to support survivors and those who use or have used violence. What do we do? Do we deal safely with disclosures is one of the questions. We recognise, respond, refer and record and are aware of our limitations. Our pastoral team, our clergy and other leaders undertake regular training. That's a key area. We understand the dynamic of spiritual abuse. And sometimes it can be said that our sermons can sometimes be a further abuser of people sitting listening to them, depending on how people interpret scripture. So how do we have a filter to think about who's listening to us as we deliver our sermons? Children's work, young people's work, marriage preparation courses, the kinds of things that help people in their relationships. Are they being offered in your church? And are there resources available in your shop, in your in my church, they call it a piety stall, but a stall somewhere where people can discreetly pick up resources. So I found that very helpful in our parish, and we're still working on it, and it's still a work in progress, but it gave us a starting point, and then we could also keep that going as we thought about all the planning that goes on in our church. So thank you.